The winter of 1876 brought more than snow to the Dakota Territory. It brought fear, suspicion, and the kind of hatred that turns neighbors into enemies. Sarah Mitchell stood in the center of Fort Laramie's wooden courthouse, her wrists bound with rope that bit into her skin. The room smelled of tobacco, wet wool, and something darker, the scent of mob justice waiting to be served. She was 23 years old, blonde hair now matted and dirty, blue eyes that once sparkled with dreams now hollow with terror. The charges against her were murder and theft. According to the settlement's most prominent merchant, Marcus Thornwell, Sarah had poisoned his wife and stolen a valuable silver locket that had been in the Thornwell family for generations. The evidence seemed damning. Mrs. Thornwell had died 2 days after drinking tea Sarah had prepared. The locket was found hidden beneath Sarah's mattress during a search of her small cabin. "Hang her!" someone shouted from the crowd gathered outside. The cry was taken up by others, a chant that grew louder with each repetition. Sarah flinched at every word, knowing that frontier justice was swift and rarely merciful. She had no family here, no one to speak for her. She had come west after her parents died of cholera, hoping to start fresh as a seamstress. Instead, she found herself employed by the Thornwells, trusted with their home, their secrets, and now accused of the worst betrayal imaginable. Captain Harrison Wells presided over the proceedings, his military bearing sharp and unforgiving. He was a man who believed in order, in the chain of command, in making examples. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't kill Mrs. Thornwell. I cared for her. She was kind to me when no one else was. The locket, I don't know how it got there. I've never stolen anything in my life." Her words sounded weak even to her own ears. Who would believe a poor seamstress over a respected merchant? Marcus Thornwell stood to address the court, his face a mask of grief that Sarah suspected was carefully constructed. "My wife took pity on this woman, gave her work, treated her almost as family. And this is how she repays us? With poison? With theft? I demand justice, Captain. I demand she pay for what she's done." The crowd roared its approval. Captain Wells raised his hand for silence. "The evidence is clear. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow." The gavel struck wood with a sound like thunder. Sarah's legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees. Guards moved to drag her away to the holding cell, a small room that smelled of fear and despair from all those who had waited there before her. As night fell, Sarah sat on the hard floor, staring at the bars that caged her. She prayed, though she wasn't sure anyone was listening. She thought of her mother's face, her father's laugh, all the small moments of happiness that seemed like distant dreams now. Tomorrow, the sun would rise, and she would die for crimes she didn't commit. But something was happening outside the fort, something Sarah couldn't have known. A Lakota hunting party had been observing the settlement, and among them was Chief Dakota, known to his people as a man of wisdom and unusual insight. He had heard the shouting, had seen the preparation of the gallows. His translator, a mixed-blood man named Joseph, had explained the situation. And Chief Dakota had made a decision that would change everything. Justice, he knew, wore many faces, but truth wore only one. Dawn broke over Fort Laramie with a sky the color of blood and ash. Sarah hadn't slept. Every creak of wood, every footstep outside her cell, sent her heart racing with the terrible knowledge that her time was running out. She could hear the construction of the gallows in the yard, the hammer strikes like drumbeats counting down to her death. Captain Wells arrived at her cell as the first light touched the horizon. "It's time," he said, not unkindly. He was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders, even when those orders meant taking a life. 2 guards unlocked the cell and pulled Sarah to her feet. Her legs barely supported her weight as they led her outside into the cold morning air. The entire settlement had gathered. Men, women, even children stood in a semicircle around the freshly built gallows. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, anger, and something worse, satisfaction. Sarah climbed the 13 steps, each one feeling like a mountain. The noose was rough hemp, coarse against her neck as the executioner positioned it. She closed her eyes and whispered a final prayer. "Stop." The command rang out with such authority that every person in the yard froze. Sarah's eyes flew open. Riding toward the fort were a dozen mounted warriors, their horses breathing clouds of steam in the frigid air. At the front rode a man whose presence commanded immediate attention. Chief Dakota sat straight-backed on a painted horse, his face weathered by years and wisdom, his eyes sharp and penetrating. Captain Wells's hand went to his sidearm. "What is the meaning of this?" "This is military business, Chief." You have no authority here. Chief Lakota dismounted with fluid grace despite his age. Joseph, his translator, dismounted beside him. Captain Wells, Joseph translated as the chief spoke in Lakota. Chief Lakota requests to speak before this woman dies. He believes there has been a mistake. There's no mistake, Marcus Thornwell shouted from the crowd. We have evidence. We have witnesses. This is none of your concern, savage. The chief's expression didn't change at the insult, but his eyes grew colder. He spoke again, and Joseph translated. Among my people, when someone is accused of murder, we do not rush to judgment. We seek truth, not revenge. Chief Lakota has observed this settlement for 3 days. He has seen things that trouble him. He asks only for the chance to present what he knows. Captain Wells hesitated. Relations with the Lakota were tense enough without creating an incident. He was also a man who, beneath his military rigidity, believed in procedure. You have 1 hour, he said finally. But if you waste our time, Chief, there will be consequences. The guards removed Sarah from the gallows and brought her to stand before the assembled crowd. Chief Lakota approached her, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and gently lifted her bound hands, examining the rope burns on her wrists. He turned to Joseph and spoke rapidly. The chief says this woman's hands tell a story, Joseph translated. They are rough from honest work, scarred from needles and thread. These are not the hands of a thief or a poisoner. These are the hands of someone who creates, not destroys. That proves nothing, Thornwell spat. Anyone can work with their hands and still be a murderer. Chief Lakota nodded as if he had expected this response. He gestured to one of his warriors, who brought forward a leather pouch. From it, the chief withdrew several items that made the crowd murmur with confusion. There was a piece of cloth, a small bottle, and something wrapped in deerskin. He laid them carefully on a wooden crate that served as a makeshift table. 3 days ago, Joseph translated, Chief Lakota's daughter became ill with a sickness similar to what killed Mrs. Thornwell. She drank from a stream that runs through this settlement. Our medicine woman examined the water and found it contaminated with something unnatural. The chief's warriors traced the source upstream. He paused, letting the tension build. They found these items hidden near the water source, concealed beneath rocks where the stream narrows before entering your settlement. Captain Wells stepped forward to examine the items. The cloth bore Marcus Thornwell's merchant mark. The bottle, when uncorked, released a bitter almond smell. Arsenic, the fort's doctor confirmed from the crowd. The third item, still wrapped, was carefully opened by Chief Lakota himself. Inside was a second silver locket, identical to the one supposedly stolen, but tarnished and old. Where did you get this? Wells demanded. Chief Lakota spoke, his voice steady and sure. Joseph translated, the chief found these items yesterday evening. He recognized the locket because he has seen Marcus Thornwell wearing it on a chain. This locket in the chief's hand is the real family heirloom. The one found in Sarah's cabin was a recently made copy, still shiny and new. Someone wanted to frame this woman and also poison the settlement's water to create chaos and fear. All eyes turned to Marcus Thornwell, whose face had gone pale as winter snow. Marcus Thornwell's composure cracked like ice under pressure. This is absurd, he shouted, but his voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. You're going to believe a savage over a respected member of this community? Over a grieving husband? He pointed an accusing finger at Chief Lakota. He probably planted those items himself to create trouble between us and the Lakota. This is a trick. Chief Lakota remained unmoved by the outburst. He spoke again, and Joseph translated with careful precision. A man who speaks truth does not need to shout. A man with nothing to hide does not tremble when evidence appears. The chief asks Captain Wells a simple question. Why would the Lakota want to help a white woman? What would we gain by saving someone we do not know? It was a point that gave everyone pause. The relationship between the fort and the neighboring Lakota had always been strained, balanced on a knife's edge between peace and conflict. Why would Chief Lakota risk that fragile peace for a stranger? Captain Wells studied the items on the makeshift table, his military mind working through the implications. Dr. Pemberton, he called to the fort's physician, examine that bottle. Tell me what's in it. The doctor approached cautiously, unstopping the bottle and smelling its contents with professional care. Arsenic, without question. A substantial amount. Enough to poison dozens of people if introduced into a water source. He picked up the locket, turning it over in his hands. This is definitely newer than a family heirloom should be. The silver has barely oxidized. I'd say it was crafted within the last month or two. Lies. Thornwell's voice rose higher, but he was backing away now, his eyes darting toward the fort's gates like a trapped animal seeking escape. My wife died from poison administered by that woman, not from drinking water. Everyone else in the settlement is fine. Not everyone, came a weak voice from the crowd. A woman stepped forward, supported by her husband. Mrs. Adelaide Cooper looked frail, her face drawn and pale. I've been terribly ill for the past week, Marcus. So have the Hendersons and the Patterson family. We all thought it was winter sickness, but now I wonder. We all draw our water from the same stream. More voices joined hers. People began comparing symptoms, realizing that a pattern of illness had indeed spread through the settlement. It had been attributed to the harsh winter, to poor diet, to bad luck. No one had connected it to the water supply until now. Chief Lakota watched this revelation unfold with patient eyes. He spoke again, a longer statement this time, and Joseph's translation commanded complete silence. The chief says that 3 weeks ago, he witnessed Marcus Thornwell arguing violently with his wife near the stream. The chief was hunting and remained hidden, but he heard Mrs. Thornwell accuse her husband of betraying her with another woman. She threatened to expose his business dealings, which she claimed were fraudulent. She said she would leave him and return to her family in the East, taking her inheritance with her. Thornwell's face went from pale to flushed with rage. You expect them to believe you were just coincidentally there? That you just happened to overhear a private conversation? The chief does not ask anyone to believe him alone, Joseph continued translating. He asks Captain Wells to investigate Marcus Thornwell's business records. He asks the captain to question whether Thornwell's recent prosperity came from honest trade or from selling watered-down goods, from cheating on weights and measures, from the very fraudulent dealings his wife discovered. Captain Wells turned to Thornwell with new eyes. Marcus, these are serious accusations. If you have nothing to hide, you'll allow us to examine your business ledgers. I will not. Thornwell snapped. This is outrageous. I'm the victim here. My wife is dead, my family heirloom was stolen, and now you're treating me like a criminal because of what some Indian claims he overheard. But his protests were growing more desperate, and the crowd sensed it. Sarah, still standing with bound hands, felt a strange sensation blooming in her chest, hope, fragile as a candle flame in wind, but hope nonetheless. Chief Lakota produced one more piece of evidence from his pouch. It was a letter, folded and sealed with wax, though the seal was now broken. He handed it to Captain Wells. The chief found this hidden with the other items. He believes it explains everything. Wells unfolded the letter and read it silently, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Thornwell with barely contained fury. This is a letter from you to a woman named Catherine Morse in Denver City. In it, you discuss your plans to free yourself from your marriage, to frame your wife's death on your household servant, and to join Mrs. Morse with your wife's inheritance money. You even mentioned purchasing a duplicate locket to plant as evidence. The crowd gasped collectively. Thornwell took 3 stumbling steps backward. That's not my letter. It's been forged. This is a conspiracy. It's in your handwriting, Marcus, Dr. Pemberton said quietly. I've seen your hand enough times on invoices. That's your writing. Thornwell's eyes went wild. He suddenly lunged toward the crowd, trying to break through, to run. But he didn't get far. Several men grabbed him, dragging him back to the center of the yard. He fought like a cornered wolf, screaming about injustice and persecution, but his words fell on ears that had turned deaf to his lies. Chief Lakota approached Sarah and, with his own hands, cut the ropes binding her wrists. She fell to her knees, sobbing with relief and shock. Sarah's tears came in great shuddering waves as the rope fell from her wrists. Her skin was raw and bleeding where the bindings had cut deep, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional release of knowing she wouldn't die today. Chief Lakota placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, speaking words she didn't understand but whose meaning was clear in his tone: compassion, protection, solidarity. Captain Wells ordered his guards to take Marcus Thornwell into custody. The merchant fought and cursed as he was dragged toward the very cell Sarah had occupied just hours earlier. His face was twisted with hatred and fear, all pretense of grief abandoned. "You're all fools," he screamed. "That woman was going to ruin me. She was going to take everything I'd built and give it to her sanctimonious family back east. I had no choice." "You had many choices," Wells said coldly. "You chose murder. You chose to poison an innocent woman and frame another for your crime. You chose to endanger this entire settlement by contaminating our water supply. He turned to his men. Lock him up. We'll hold a proper trial, though I suspect the outcome is already clear. As Thornwell was hauled away, still ranting and raving, the crowd began to disperse, shamefaced and quiet. They had been ready to hang an innocent woman based on planted evidence and the word of a skilled liar. Some approached Sarah with mumbled apologies, but she barely heard them. She was still kneeling in the dirt, trying to make sense of her sudden salvation. Dr. Pemberton brought clean water and bandages for her wrists. As he gently cleaned and wrapped her wounds, he spoke softly. I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell. We should have investigated more thoroughly. We should have questioned the evidence instead of accepting it at face value. We failed you terribly. Sarah found her voice, though it came out rough and strained. Why did he do it? I mean, I know Mrs. Thornwell discovered his fraud, but to kill her? To try to kill me? To poison innocent people? Greed and fear make monsters of ordinary men, the doctor replied. Marcus was heavily in debt. His business was failing. His wife's inheritance was the only thing keeping him afloat, but she controlled it. When she threatened to leave, she threatened his entire world. Some men, when cornered, become dangerous. Chief Lakota sat down beside Sarah, and Joseph knelt to translate their conversation. The chief wants you to know that he did not do this for reward or recognition. He did it because justice matters, whether for his people or for yours. He says that truth is like water, it will always find its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. Sarah looked into the chief's weathered face, seeing wisdom and kindness there that she had never expected to find. Please tell him I'm grateful. Tell him he saved my life when he had no reason to care whether I lived or died. Joseph translated, and Chief Lakota smiled for the first time. He spoke, and Joseph relayed his words. The chief says you are wrong. He had every reason to care. Among the Lakota, we believe all life is sacred, all people are connected. When one person suffers injustice, we all suffer. When one person is saved, we are all lifted higher. He also says, Joseph paused, a slight smile crossing his face. He also says his mother once told him that a good man helps others without counting the cost. Captain Wells approached the group, his military bearing softened slightly by the morning's revelations. Chief Lakota, I owe you an apology and my thanks. You showed more wisdom and careful investigation than I did. You saved an innocent life today. The chief responded through Joseph, Captain Wells, the chief hopes this can be a new beginning between our peoples. He has seen that there are good people among the settlers, just as there are bad ones. The same is true among the Lakota. Perhaps if we work together to seek truth and justice, we can find a better path forward than the one of suspicion and violence we've been walking. Wells considered this carefully. I would like that, Chief. I truly would. But I can't speak for the whole settlement or for the military command. All I can promise is that I will treat you and your people with the respect you've earned today. Chief Lakota nodded, seeming satisfied with this honest answer. He rose gracefully to his feet and offered his hand to Sarah, helping her stand. She swayed slightly, weak from fear and relief and sleeplessness, but managed to remain upright. What will happen now? Sarah asked, directing her question to Captain Wells. To me, I mean. I have nowhere to go. I worked for the Thornwells, and obviously I can't go back there. Wells frowned, considering. Mrs. Thornwell had family in Philadelphia. I'll send word of what happened. Her estate will need to be settled, and you should receive compensation for what you've endured. In the meantime, there are families in the settlement who need seamstresses. I'm sure we can find you work and lodging. Chief Lakota spoke again, a longer statement that made Joseph raise his eyebrows before translating. The chief extends an invitation to you, Sarah Mitchell. If you wish, you may come to live among his people for a time. His wife and daughters are skilled in many crafts, and they could teach you their ways while you teach them yours. He says sometimes healing comes from leaving behind the place where harm occurred. The offer hung in the cold morning air like a gift wrapped in uncertainty. Sarah stared at Chief Lakota, searching his face for any hint of ulterior motive, but she found only genuine kindness and an understanding that seemed to pierce through all her defenses. The idea of leaving the fort, of living among the Lakota, should have terrified her. Everything she had been taught about Indians had painted them as dangerous savages. Yet this man had saved her life when her own people had been ready to end it. I don't understand, Sarah said slowly. Why would you want me there? I'm a stranger. I know nothing of your ways. I would be a burden. Joseph translated her concerns, and Chief Dakota's response came with a warmth that needed no translation in his tone. The chief says that strangers become family when they share bread and stories. He says his people have lost much to the white man's expansion: land, family members, sacred places. But they have not lost their humanity or their belief in kindness. He offers you a home not because you are useful, but because you need one, and his people have room in their hearts for one more. Sarah felt fresh tears welling up, but these were different from the tears of terror she had shed earlier. These came from a place deep inside her that had been starved for compassion. "Tell him yes," she whispered. "Tell him I accept his offer, if only for a while. I need to leave this place. Too much has happened here." The chief smiled and nodded, speaking a few words in Lakota that sounded like a blessing. The tension that had gripped the fort all morning finally began to ease. Captain Wells stepped forward with a proposition of his own. "Before you go, Chief Dakota, there's the matter of Marcus Thornwell's trial. Your testimony will be crucial. The evidence you gathered, the letter you found, these things will ensure he faces proper justice for his crimes." Chief Dakota listened to the translation and then responded with words that surprised everyone. The chief says he will testify, but he asks Captain Wells to consider a different kind of justice. Among the Lakota, when someone commits a terrible crime, the focus is not only on punishment but on restoring balance. The chief suggests that Thornwell's assets be used to compensate those he harmed: Miss Mitchell, the families who became ill from the poisoned water, and Mrs. Thornwell's relatives back east. He suggests that Thornwell be required to work, under guard, to clean the stream and make it safe again. He suggests that justice should heal the community, not just satisfy vengeance. Captain Wells looked thoughtful. "That's not how military justice typically works, Chief. We have procedures, regulations. Thornwell will likely hang for what is done." "And will his hanging bring back Mrs. Thornwell?" Joseph translated the chief's question. "Will it undo the suffering he caused? Or will it simply be another death added to the toll?" The chief does not say Thornwell should go free. He says Thornwell should face consequences that actually repair the damage he caused. The crowd that remained had grown quiet, listening to this exchange with fascination. Several people nodded in agreement with the chief's words. Sarah found herself nodding as well. She wanted Thornwell to face justice for what he'd done, but the thought of watching another hanging, even of the man who had framed her, turned her stomach. "I'll take it under consideration," Wells said finally. "But I can't promise anything. The decision isn't entirely mine to make." Chief Dakota seemed to understand the limitations of the captain's authority. He gestured to his warriors, preparing to depart. Before he left, he approached Sarah one final time. He removed a beautifully beaded necklace from around his own neck and placed it around hers. Through Joseph, he explained its significance. "This belonged to my mother. It represents protection and new beginnings. The chief gives it to you as a promise that you will always have a place among his people, whether you stay for a season or for a lifetime. He says you have survived death and deserve to live fully." Sarah touched the necklace with trembling fingers, feeling the careful craftsmanship of each bead. "How can I ever repay this kindness?" The chief says the only repayment he asks is that you pass kindness forward when you have the opportunity. He says that's how we create a better world, one act of mercy at a time. 3 days later, Sarah left Fort Laramie riding alongside Chief Dakota's band. She carried few possessions: her sewing kit, a few changes of clothes, and the beaded necklace that had become her most treasured belonging. As they rode away from the fort, she turned back one last time to see the gallows still standing in the yard, a grim reminder of how close she had come to death. Marcus Thornwell did eventually stand trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was found guilty of murder, attempted murder, fraud, and endangering public safety. But Captain Wells, influenced by Chief Dakota's words and by the community's desire for healing rather than more violence, recommended a sentence of hard labor. Thornwell spent the next 20 years working to repay his victims, clean the contaminated stream, and contribute to the settlement's infrastructure. It wasn't the dramatic justice of a hanging, but it was thorough and restorative. Sarah spent 6 months living among the Lakota, learning their language, their crafts, their ways of seeing the world. She taught the women European sewing techniques while they taught her beadwork and hide tanning. She learned that justice didn't always look like courtrooms and gallows. Sometimes it looked like a chief who cared enough about truth to investigate what others ignored. Sometimes it looked like a community that chose restoration over revenge. Eventually, Sarah did return to the settlements, but she was forever changed. She became a bridge between two worlds, advocating for understanding and fair treatment of the Lakota people. She never forgot the day she stood on the gallows, or the man who cut her free. She carried Chief Dakota's lesson with her always, that true justice isn't about satisfying anger or following tradition blindly. It's about seeking truth, protecting the innocent, and healing what has been broken. Years later, when people asked her how she survived being falsely accused and nearly executed, Sarah would touch the beaded necklace she still wore and say, "I was saved by a man who understood that justice and mercy aren't opposites, they are partners. He showed me that the law should serve people, not the other way around." That's a lesson the whole world needs to learn. Chief Dakota's intervention that winter morning became legendary in the Dakota Territory. It stood as proof that wisdom and compassion could be found in unexpected places, and that the best kind of justice wasn't the swiftest or the harshest, but the one that created the most healing. It was a different kind of justice, and in the end, it was exactly what was needed.